the various aspects of our history. In today's program, we bring you a feature on drain of wealth, which focuses on the negative effects of the British rule on the Indian economy, to be followed by another feature on the official attitude towards the Congress from 1885 to 1905 under the British rule. And lastly, we will take a comprehensive look on the condition of the peasants and the peasants' leadership in India during the period 1858 to 1964. We begin now with the feature Drain of Wealth. Let me tell you that the course code is EHI 1, Block 1, and this is an elective course in history.
As we all know, today we are a free nation. Free to lay down our own economic policies. Free to regulate or determine the nature of our economy and the course of its development.
But have we ever thought about the condition of the Indian economy under the colonial rule?
Well, yes, the colonial rule led to deindustrialization, ruin of handicrafts, commercialization of agriculture, etc.
That's right. But the most serious effect was the drain of India's wealth to England, meaning the prosperity of the British. For the health of our Queen.
For the Empire.
We have made India modern.
We gave the Indians law and order.
Ji Hazur, Ji Hazur, Ji Hazur.
These black Indians. This was how the British led their life in India, full of luxury and always surrounded by a handful of Indians who regarded them as my-baps.
But do you know what was happening to the ordinary people? For example, the peasants?
No water, no crops, famine.
Our animals are dying.
Evictions, cesses, extortions and whatnot.
Hey, hide, hide, brother, hide. There comes the Hakim to demand land revenue.
You wretched peasants! Where is the revenue?
We have nothing.
How dare you refuse, huh?
Each section of the Indian society suffered under the colonial regime, whether it was an agricultural laborer, a weaver, a merchant, or an educated person who belonged to the middle class. Hunger and misery had become a regular feature of the lives of the Indian masses.
Father, you are a laborer on daily wages. But was my grandfather also a laborer?
No, son, no. There was a time when these Firangis bought cloth made by my father. How happy we were. We had our own house. We had money. Today, my other fellow weavers are also laborers. Not only the ordinary people suffered under the British rule, it was also a curse for those Indians who could have invested money for industrialization. For example, the merchants.
These Firangis have established factories, brother. Why don't you invest in setting up a mill?
No. They will immediately impose tariffs and duties. I don't want to sink my money.
But they're helping the industrialists.
Yes, brother, yes. But only Englishmen, not Indians like me. Why will they tolerate us? They don't want any rivals for their industry and goods.
It was under such circumstances that Dada Bhai Nauroji raised his voice against the exploitation of the Indians by the British.
Owing to this one unnatural policy of the British rule, of ignoring India's interests and making it drudge for the benefit of England, the whole rule moves in a wrong, unnatural and suicidal groove.
Gradually, the Indians realized that their resources were being drained to England. They were beginning to realize the economic implications of foreign rule. The British claims of a prosperous India were now being challenged.
An awakening was taking place. Foreign rule was not only politically bad. The British were not only destroying our culture, they were not only humiliating us, but looting us economically as well. An economic drain was taking place.
What do you think drain of wealth means in a colonial economy?
Well, it means the outflow of money and resources of wealth from the colony to the country which controls the colony.
But what does the colony get in return?
Absolutely nothing. It is like a one-way traffic. In fact, in the case of India, it was like a tribute to the English nation. This drain of wealth ruined the Indian economy. Deindustrialization, fall in per capita income, economic stagnation and lack of capital investment were some of the consequences.
Was India always like this?
No. Initially, when the East India Company started trade with India, the balance of trade was in India's favor. The English used to bring their own gold and silver to buy Indian goods. Spices, silks, muslin, etc. were in great demand in Europe. During this phase, the East India Company was criticized in England for draining its wealth to India.
This was a time when mercantilism was the dominant economic thought practiced by various European nations. In short, mercantilism can be described as grouping together of those economic policies and ideas which the countries adopted in order to increase their wealth and prosperity.
There is a common myth in history writing, created mainly by imperialist historians, that the various Indian princes and kings used to fight among themselves. There was no law and order, anarchy prevailed all over. The British had come merely to trade, but these princes and kings sought their help in their own fights, and this was how the British got involved in India's affairs.
Of course, there used to be wars amongst the Indian rulers. But this kind of justification for the establishment and continuity of British rule is far from real.
The British were shrewd merchants. They realized that unless they devised means and methods to check the outflow of bullion from England to India, they would be in trouble. It is in this context that they intervened in Indian affairs. At first, it was to derive trade and tariff concessions. A little later, in 1765, it was the acquisition of Diwani, or the right to collect land revenue in Bengal, that turned the relationship upside down. But the question is, how?
It turned upside down because now they did not need their money from England to buy Indian goods. The revenues they extorted and raised in India were used to buy Indian goods. Hence started the drain of wealth.
In the next phase of the colonial economy, not only the raw materials and goods from India were purchased by revenues raised in India, but even the machine-manufactured goods of England were sold in India. With a firm political grip over the country, the East India Company had converted India into a big market for English goods. This brought about a twofold drainage of wealth from India.
It was only after 1858 that some sort of English capital investment took place in India. The control of the colony was taken over from the East India Company, after the great uprising of 1857. India now was a part of the British Empire, the precious jewel in the British crown.
The British capital was invested in plantations, banks and a few industries. There were many reasons for this capital investment.
Take the example of railways. Everybody says that the British introduced the railways in India. And no doubt the railways contributed a lot towards modernization of India. Actually, the railway lines were laid to link the ports with those regions which provided raw materials for the industries in England. The aim here was not exactly to lead India to the path of modernization, but to reduce the cost of procurement and make this process a quicker one.
Moreover, the British capitalists initiated limited industrialization because they were aware that both labor and raw materials were in abundance and also cheaper in India. This would increase their profits, which in other words meant more drain of wealth from India.
As we have already mentioned, after 1858, the Indian administration had been taken over by the British Crown, and as such, there were many other developments which now accelerated the pace of the drain of wealth. The nationalist leaders towards the last quarter of the 19th century revealed how the Indians had been paying for their own servitude.
All the wars and military campaigns carried out by the British to meet their imperialist designs had been fought with Indian money. Whether it was the Anglo-Burmese War or Anglo-Afghan War, it was the Indian who had paid the price. The cost of maintaining the British Indian Army in the name of defense of India was borne by the Indians, whereas what this army defended always were the British interests.
Not only the army, but the entire administrative structure of the Raj, whether it was civil administration, revenue administration, police or CID, was maintained by Indian money.
And have you heard of the home charges, a term that was coined by the British? All those Englishmen who served in India got their pensions and other retirement benefits in England out of the money that India earned through exports.
The Secretary of State, that is the member of the British Cabinet in charge of Indian affairs, was paid his salary from Indian money. The entire cost of his office was also borne by India. This issue figured prominently in the resolutions of the Indian National Congress and in the writings of nationalist leaders. So we see that the British left no stone unturned to fleece money from India. The Indians were aware of this loot, but it were the early nationalists who came out with the drain of wealth theory, proved it through empirical data, demonstrated its ill effects, and with one voice challenged the economic exploitation of India as a whole by the British.
You just heard a feature on drain of wealth